Well, hi everyone. Welcome to week 13, chapter 13 of the semester. I'm Professor Rios, and this week we move on to Southeast Asia, viewed from the perspective of the Himalayan wheel. It is clearly southeast of it, including Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, and the western portion of this island right here. It is an area that's dominated by shallow ocean, so continental crust that's been flooded as a result of sea level rise over the millennia. It is made up of thousands of islands, and you can view it from the perspective of two different places. So you were talking about Insular, the interior portion, and then the rimland or the islands to the south and east. So one area is more prone to volcanic seismic activity. The other one is prone to more typhoons and tropical activity. Okay. There are active volcanoes from the more iconic ones like Krakatoa right there. Whether it's original Krakatoa, which blew up in 1883, or Anak Krakatoa, which blew up in 2018, it is an island region that is remarkably active in terms of volcanic and earthquake activity. This region is home to famous volcanoes like Tambora, which sits here in the island of Sumatra, and then there are volcanoes throughout the region. If you just simply do a zoom, here's one volcanic cone, here's a second one, another one, another one. I mean, the island, the region is literally covered by volcanic peaks. It is, of course, the Ring of Fire, where this Philippine plate collides with the Indian plate, creating a subduction zone. You also find that in the Philippines, where you have 6 active volcanoes, including the more famous one, Mount Pinatubo, which blew up in 1991. Of course, the region is home to a tropical rainforest, which has been largely deforested for the growth and harvesting of tea, coffee, and palm oil. So the region is interestingly divided again between the mainland part and the island part. And it sits nicely between Oceania, Australia, and China, or East Asia. So it's sort of under the influence of both those regions. Currently, the South China Sea is an area that is under conflict in a way. A lot of claims by China, claims by all these different regions. So this area is sort of it's becoming a bigger and bigger player, not only in sort of military circles, but also because so much of the world trade goes through places like Singapore and Vietnam and China and the Philippines, and eventually up to the Koreas and Japan. So that is the Google Earth sort of overview of the region. Now let's look at the actual presentation. Again, when you look at an image like this one right here at the beginning, this is called a stupa, which is a place of meditation, if I could say that clearly. Here you see the contrast or the confluence of the natural world, the mountains on the background. These are volcanoes. And of course, the stupa itself, which is a human landscape. Some of the learning objectives for the lesson and some of the key terms. So now, again, 2 main regions, mainland and insular. These are the islands here. This would be, of course, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Myanmar. Okay, 11 countries, 10 of which are in this ASEAN, Association of Southeastern Nations. It is a highly vulnerable region to the whims of the global economy because so many of its customers are Western nations like the United States and Europe and Canada and even Japan. And of course, no big surprise, strong influence by China. That is the look at it from the map perspective. And here you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different plates that are affecting the area. So it is an area that is clearly volcanic and seismically active, probably more so than any other region we've talked about this term. In fact, this is one region where no part of it is immune from the effects of seismic activity. Water and borders. This is a big deal in this region, and there are 2 videos that I hope you look at. They're like less than 10 minutes apiece. One explains maritime law, and one explains China and the South China Sea, which is in essence tied to maritime law. But this explains how complex the borders in this region happen to be, and many of the things that China is doing as they become a bigger and bigger global power. Again, let's look at some of the physical landscapes of the region, whether it be the mainland or the insular. Environmental issues include, but are not limited to, forest fires, protected areas, air pollution, of course, deforestation. The area here about severe deforestation, not only is it because of commercial logging, but also for the clearing for tea and coffee plantations, as well as palm oil, which, as you will either find out or already know, are big players in so many other things and so many other products we consume, like in the United States, on a daily basis. Again, that's what deforestation looks like when you take old growth tropical rainforests and you literally clear cut them. The problem there becomes the bottom of a tropical rainforest tends to be very thick with what's called peat. It's a very spongy surface that can retain a lot of water, but if you remove the trees, that water now then drains out, and this becomes really, really dry, which can then easily catch fire. And of course, deforestation, this is what palm oil looks like. And you might wonder, well, what's the difference between this green and this green? Well, it's a huge difference. These palm plantations are very, very manicured. And while these are palms and vegetation, they don't do the same amount of carbon clearing as what would a natural forest do. And so there are 3 videos that I highly recommend you watch. If you're interested, for example, in what the palm oil industry, what products are part of it, you might be surprised. Anything from milk, chocolate, ice cream, eyeshadow, lipstick, ramen noodles. All of them contain significant amount of it. And as a result, that part of the global economy is linked to this region in a very significant way. Palm oil is cheap. Therefore, it is easy to include in many other products that we consume. And so again, I highly recommend you watch these. When you look at climate, we're talking about it's an equatorial region, so the rainfall is typically steady throughout the year. There are portions of it that are seasonal, wet, dry, so monsoon. The area is, of course, like many coastal regions, prone to sea level rise, especially with large populations living in coastal plains. So here is the tropical climate. As you can see, most of the color is this sort of coral or reddish maroon color of a tropical wet climate, tropical monsoon, or tropical savanna. These two have a dry season. This one does not. So if you're in Singapore, if you are in southern Malaysia, if you're in Indonesia, you literally have no dry season. Now, once you get far enough south away from the equator, you get into an area that has a slight dry season. And there you see that by the peaks in the precipitation graphic. Now look at Singapore, and there is no peak in precipitation. It's mostly steady, quite a bit, right about 1 degree north latitude. Other natural hazards, typhoons. Some of the strongest in the world have happened here. In 2013, Tropical Typhoon Haiyan, tsunamis like the 2004 tsunami, which killed over 280,000 people, and of course, earthquakes and volcanoes. So this is an image of every single tropical cyclone track up until about the year 2017, I believe. Notice how there are none near the equator. So this region is not subject to them. You have to get to about 5 degrees north and higher before you get into this area of intense cyclone activity. In 2013, Central Philippines sustained winds of 195 miles per hour. It is now the second strongest tropical cyclone ever. It was #1 until Hurricane Patricia in 2015, which affected Mexico. Again, this area is particularly vulnerable because it has some of the warmest ocean waters on Earth, so there's lots of fuel. And again, even for a place that's used to tropical cyclone activity like the Philippines, this region was really devastated. And here you see the power of water, taking a big ship and just literally shoving it inland. And there's what it did when it hit the Philippines as a Category 5. Eventually finding its way into southern China. Volcanoes, well, here's a mountain in the Philippines called Mount Mayon. And this is a stratovolcano, very distinctive cone that is active, as you can see by the image. This volcano, it is not unlike what you would find in Washington State or Alaska or Japan or Indonesia. It is a stratovolcano, typically explosive. And there you see the millennia of layering that's basically formed this very distinctive cone-shaped mountain. As far as volcanoes, in this region, there are no typhoons, but there's lots of volcanoes and earthquakes. So you sort of trade hazards. If you go further north, you really have no volcanoes up there. You do have a few earthquakes. Here, primarily, you're talking about earthquake activity. Tsunamis as well. So it's a tectonically active region, and basically a tsunami is when the entire ocean floor is dislodged, and as a result, you move the entire volume of water up and down a bit, and then waves emanate from that point, creating a harbor wave, which is basically the definition of tsunami from the Japanese. This is, for example, what happened in Indonesia. This is Banda Aceh before and after. So that gives you a sense of the power of water in a relatively short period of time. Population and settlement. Well, a lot of the population here is in deltas, coastal regions, areas that are fertile, that are conducive to agriculture. And there are some stark differences in terms of demographics between states. For example, the mainland is concentrated along deltas, whether it be in Vietnam, whether it be in Laos, whether it be in Cambodia or Myanmar. In the island is restricted to the coastal plains. Okay, So there you have, whether it's Hanoi, Bangkok, Ho Chi Minh City, Rangoon. And then in other areas, these are not deltas, they're mostly coastal plains like Manila, Davao, Jakarta, Singapore. When you're looking at some of the numbers, the region has a really set of low fertility rates with very few exceptions, like Laos and Indonesia. And these numbers are going down as we speak, like every other region of the world. So you look at a place like the Philippines in 2020 had a TFR of 2.9, stage 3, still growing, but slowing down. Malaysia, on the other hand, much lower, stage 4, TFR of 1.8, which is very similar to the United States, growing very, very slowly. That's the difference here. When you look at a place like Vietnam, slightly higher at 2.1 replacement level in 2020. And Singapore, which is an island or city state, has the lowest TFR in the planet, tied with South Korea at 1.1. So basically this says that on average, a woman has about 1 kid. That's it. In terms of more population and settlement discussion, we're talking about the idea of swidden agriculture, which is slash and burn. You cut all the vegetation. This is true in Africa. This is true in South America. This is true in Central America. You cut the vegetation, you burn it, you use it for a few years, and then you move on. Eventually, the land becomes less and less productive as heavy rains wash away much of the nutrients that are found in the soil. And again, that's what it looks like. It's a very dirty, very haphazard event. And it has really bad economic consequences and environmental consequences. Because when you burn it, you're putting lots of carbon into the air. In addition, clearing lots of forests for tea harvesting and coffee. So coffee, tea harvesting, and palm oil plantations. As far as migration and movement of people, similar to what's happening in Brazil or Nigeria or Pakistan, the idea of moving people on purpose away from densely populated areas into less populated areas. This is happening in Indonesia, it's happening in the Philippines. And if you look at it from a map perspective, this area here, Java, has been traditionally more densely populated than any of the other islands in Indonesia. And as a result, they're moving people away to some of these other islands to sort of broaden out their population footprint. Okay, so it's basically migrating within one part of a region to a less populated area of your own region. So imagine moving people from New York and California and Texas to places like Wyoming, North Dakota, Iowa, Kansas. You're sort of spreading the population out. Not something that is practiced in the United States or would ever be allowed to happen, quite frankly. But in many other regions of the world, this is actually common practice. Again, the idea of primate cities, the idea of a dominance of a big city like Bangkok or Manila. And as a result, these big cities can't handle the hyper-congestion that is found. And therefore, these squatter settlements tend to happen. Think about what you saw in India. You saw it in parts of Africa. You saw it in parts of Central and South America. Other landscapes include the city-state of Singapore, formerly of Malaysia. Singapore is a city that's also a country. So it is, I've never been to it, but knowing people that have, they call it one of the most idyllic, beautiful places on earth. It's very new, it's very clean. It's very safe from the perspective of policing here is very, very strong. And you can get in trouble for what would be considered minor infractions in other parts of the world, quite frankly. But it's a very prosperous area. It is an economic and technological hub. This is where a lot of the world trade happens and comes from, the idea of transportation of shipping. So it's an area that is significant to the world economy. As far as religion and cultural diversity and coherence, so whether it's religion, like for example, the two main religions in the area are Islam and Christianity. In fact, this is the fastest growing region of the world where Islam is taking off. It is in the Middle East. It's not Africa. It's not Saudi Arabia. It is basically this region. Buddhism, which is native to the region, is sort of competing in this area with these two religions. Christianity was brought over by the Spanish into the Philippines. And so it remains a significant religion there, primarily Roman Catholicism. But if you go to southern Philippines, it's more Muslim because it is closer to Indonesia. Okay. And here's a look at diversity of religion from a map perspective. Again, Buddhism in the blue and the pink, Islam in the green, and Christianity in the yellow. And there you see, when you get to southern Philippines, you definitely see more Islam, but the northern portion of it is more Christian. As far as language, there's really no dominant language. Instead, hundreds of geographically isolated ones exist. And like many areas of the world, the area has turned to English as, remember this term, lingua franca, which is the language of trade and business and commerce. And if you look at it from a map perspective, this is sort of what you can expect, besides English, of course. These are some of the more local language families that are important in the area. And notice how it's sort of tied to the region. The islands versus the more mainland region have different language sort of groupings. So this is where I'm going to leave it today. Again, this is an interesting region because it's sort of caught between Australia and Oceania. That would be next week's chapter. And China and East Asia. Of course, China is becoming a bigger and bigger and bigger superpower. So their influence is becoming clear and dominant, especially in this region. It is naturally affected by things like hurricanes and volcanoes and earthquake activities. So it's an area that is busy. It's an area that is complex. And it is an area that is very heavily populated. And so as a result, it's becoming a bigger and bigger player in the world scene. If you have any questions, please come to the live office hour. Otherwise, I hope you have a great week and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.